So here's an absolutely mind-boggling story. Defense Department, the war on terror has cost $250 million a day for 16 years. $250 million a day for 16 years for the war on terror. Hey, by the way, you do know that there are more terrorists now than there were before we started the war on terror. So the definition of victory would be what? The definition of victory would be eliminating the terrorists, or at the very least, limiting the number of them, right? I mean, that's like obvious. That would be victory. Hey, I limited the number of terrorists. You know, we were able to keep them under this threshold because this threshold is something that we deem to be the biggest threat and yada yada. It was an abject failure. It's like the war on drugs. They go, oh, the war on drugs. There were some people who literally said at the launch of the war on drugs, or even a few years into it, they said, well, the goal of the war on drugs is to eliminate drug use. Eliminate it? We're at the point they haven't even cut it. So the argument should have been, oh, we're trying to eliminate it, or at the very least reduce it massively. We haven't even reduced it. There's the same number of people doing drugs, or more people doing drugs now than there was before we did the war on drugs. So abject failure across the board. You flushed trillions down the toilet, and you got nothing to show for it. Same thing with the war on terror. More terrorists now than there were when we started the war on terror. It has objectively failed. And it costs $250 million a day. American taxpayers have spent $1.46 trillion on wars abroad since September 11, 2001. The Department of Defense periodically releases a cost of war report. The newly released version, obtained by the Federation of American Scientists, Secrecy News blog, covers the time from the September 11 terror attacks through mid-2017. The Afghanistan war from 2001 to 2014 and Iraq war from 2003 to 2011 account for the bulk of expenses, more than $1.3 trillion. The continuing presence in Afghanistan and aerial anti-ISIS operations in Iraq and Syria since 2014 have cost a combined $120 billion. The report's costs include only direct war-related expenses, such as operating and maintaining bases, procuring equipment, and paying for and feeding troops. It most notably does not include the expense of veterans' benefits for troops who serve in these wars or the intelligence community's expenses related to global war on terror. Okay, so when you give the total picture, it's actually way more than this. Because when you include all that other stuff that they left out of this analysis, and you extrapolate to future expenses, by the year 2053, the war in Iraq alone will have cost $7 trillion. $7 trillion. That's just Iraq. That's not Afghanistan. That's not all the other places that we're bombing and we're doing missions and stuff. So this $1.46 trillion consideration is a gigantic underestimate, okay? But to this point, what we've already spent, $250 million a day. Could you imagine what we could do with $250 million a day if we weren't doing useless, unnecessary, counterproductive wars overseas? Are you kidding me? Free college, free healthcare. I mean, we're even, with this much money, you're probably throwing universal daycare as well, paid vacation by law. You know, all these things that we could do with this money, rebuild our infrastructure, make it so that we have the number one infrastructure in the world, the opportunities that have been wasted. And the fallout, what? Has been more terrorists and, you know, growing anti-American sentiment around the world. We have 900 military bases that cost $100 billion a year to maintain. That's not included in this. Even all this money, we just throw it. It's a money pit. You just throw out as much money as you possibly can towards war and war-related activities. But everything else, can't afford it. No, we can afford it. We can afford, even if we cut the military 50%, we still have the largest military in the world by far and away. And we have so many more resources that we could put towards things that make sense. So enough with the nonsense, man. And by the way, this is what the younger generation, millennials, look at this and they go, you guys are all dumb. Like, the millennial bashing is so fucking funny. Because millennials didn't create this. You built this. The older generations built this. And then they're going to turn around and fucking have scorn with us? Are you kidding me? You got to look in the fucking mirror, guys. This needs to be cleaned up, and that's on our generation, the millennial generation, to do so. And guess what? It is virtually unanimous opinion. Even people on the right, you know? There are more libertarian-leaning Republicans in the millennial generation than there are socially conservative-leaning Republicans who are big-time hawks. So it's time to clean up the mess. Let's get to it. Let's take this money and put it towards something that makes sense.